Just giving everyone a moment here to get logged in since we're right at the top of the hour on the dot. While we give a few seconds, I'll just note, as always, that we have our chat box over to the right-hand side here. At any point throughout today's webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in there. We'll have some time at the end to answer those. If they're super specific and we don't have a chance to get to all of them, then we'll reach out afterwards to answer any remaining questions. I see we got quite a few more people popping in, so I'm going to continue to give just a little bit of time. As I do that, I'll introduce myself for those of you that haven't joined us on one of our webinars before. My name is Nathan Smith. I'm the VP of Sales here at Minut. Tend to give a lot of these webinars. I'm based in the US. For those of you that don't know as much about our company, it's based in Malmo, Sweden. That's where the headquarters are. And then we have an office in London as well. So we have quite a few customers from around the globe as a result. So I saw some of the people who had registered are from all over. So thank you for joining us at whether it's afternoon or morning in your time. I'm sure people will continue to drop in, but I'm actually going to go ahead and kick off. Today's webinar is mostly about previewing one of our newest features, and we're going to walk through an actual demo of how it works. So we'll just have just a few slides to set it up and jump straight into that. The topic today is seeing how AI can simplify your guest messaging. So for those of you that have been into these webinars before, been using Minut for a while, you know that we talk quite a bit about how property managers often have tons and tons of tools at their disposal, or at least available to use, right? You may be using a ton of them already. You may be considering which ones to use. But one of the things we hear a lot is that these tools tend to be disconnected. It can be very difficult to manage a full tech stack of dozens of tools, especially if they don't integrate well with one another. So we have been hard at work as a team, doing our best to add additional features to Minut that make that a bit easier for you. We know that the features we build may not always be perfect for every single person. You may very well still need to go somewhere else and use a tool similar to what we've built. And that's completely fine. We think there's obviously room for all, and everyone's portfolio is a little bit different. But if we can provide you with tools that help limit that tech stack, simplify things for you and your team, that is absolutely our goal. With that in mind, today, as I mentioned, we are going to talk about messaging, and I want to kick things off first with a question. How are you currently handling replying to guest questions? And before you answer, I just want to clarify that here, I'm not talking about pre-stay messages or post-stay messages that are automated, but specifically about questions that guests have. So if they reach out to you with a question, are you responding personally right now? Is someone in your team responding personally? Are you using an external service like a virtual assistant? Are you already using an AI tool through your PMS or another platform? Or are you just using templates through your PMS or another platform? I'll give just a moment for people to answer that question. It looks like the front runner at the moment is using AI through your PMS or another platform, but we also have several whose team are responding, or you're responding personally. That's good to know. Okay, great. Feel free to continue considering and answering if you haven't already. And as you do that, I'll just click over to the next slide and mention, this is also something that we talk about on some of these webinars. It's definitely not the first time I've said this, which is that hospitality never sleeps. However, our goal at Minut is to make sure that you do get to sleep. We know that sometimes that's a challenge, especially with a growing portfolio. Maybe you haven't started growing the team just yet, or maybe you have grown the team and it's just that your portfolio is still growing so much that you are answering questions in the middle of the night. Our goal with several of our features actually is to limit that situation, and this new feature is no exception. We often survey both property managers as well as short-term rental guests. And what we hear from guests is that communication is one of the top factors for their guest satisfaction for the stay. If they're going to give a 5-star rating, oftentimes that begins with communication. You see that in a ton of reviews, that people are very communicative. They answered my questions right away, etc. So I'm sure you're well aware that that's incredibly important. So it's probably no surprise then that we hear from over 80% of our property managers that we survey that they are receiving questions on nights and weekends and having to answer those outside of normal business hours. And we know that as your portfolio grows, that adds up, right? Every little question, even if it's just a few minutes to respond, the larger the portfolio, the more those questions come in and the more time that takes from you. So today we'd like to walk you through our new Minute Messaging. Minute Messaging, the goal here is to take the mess out of messaging. We know many of you, if you're using a property management system, you may already have a unified inbox of some kind. If you do, you know how incredibly valuable that is. Instead of having to try and answer questions from all over in several different areas, it's great to be able to see them in one place. But beyond that, it's not just about where the messaging lives, but also something automated. So that's why we're also going to show you today Autopilot, which is essentially the extra pair of hands that you've dreamt of, that you wish you had. It's an AI assistant. I'll show you how it can answer questions for your guests automatically. Along with answering their questions before they even get there, it can welcome your guests. It does sound quite human. That's our goal here, is that it's not that we want to shy away from the fact that it is AI. We know many people may know that right out of the gate, but we want it to be as human as possible. We want it to feel as open and welcoming and kind as possible. So it will answer things in a human way. And when it's unsure, it escalates to you or your team. That's one of the pieces of feedback we've heard from our customers who may use another tool now, is that the AI can go rogue and start to answer questions for guests that are incorrect. And so that is definitely one of the things we want to keep from happening. So I'm going to show you how we do that today. And I'm actually going to take you from start to finish. So with that said, actually, I will, one more slide here, that knowledge is power, that Autopilot only uses the knowledge you provide. As I said on the last slide, you're going to put the information in, it's going to use that information only. It will escalate to you if it doesn't have the information, and then it actually adds suggestions to you of here's something you could answer in the guide that you've given to the AI that will help it better answer questions in the future. So it's analyzing the questions and basically finding commonality and giving you suggestions about how to update your information. So with that, I'll switch over to my actual live environment, and we're going to take a look at that messaging in action. So I've got my Minute organization pulled up here. Please do feel free to follow along if you happen to have two screens or the space to do so. You're more than welcome. I'll go slow enough, hopefully, that you can do that. The first thing that you will need to do, if you haven't already done so, is on the left-hand side under messaging. If you'll click on Autopilot, you won't see all the nice things I'm showing you now. You will actually see a message that is prompting you to sign in or sign up for our beta access to this new feature. So feel free to do so now. Once you've done that, then you will have access to everything that I'm showing you here. And like I said, please feel free to follow along as I do it. So just to kick things off, I'm actually going to stay right here on this Autopilot screen. And you can see that there are a few tabs at the top: knowledge, suggestions, and settings. As you may just have started using this, maybe even just this moment you're following along with me, you obviously won't have any suggestions just yet, but we'll get to that in a bit. But you'll begin here on knowledge, and there's a button here to add content, which if you click, you can give this a title and then some information. Before I even do that, I just want to call your attention to the bottom where it says apply to a specific unit, building, or location. Add it below. So to kick things off, one of the best things you can do is actually add the information about your rentals in general. Let's say you have 10 rental units and you have some rules that apply to all 10. The best thing you could do is put those rules here in one document. Let's just call it rental policies. Add that information here. And then instead of simply applying it to one unit, you can apply it to every single unit you have. In my example here, I only have 2 in my system, so I could apply it to both and just say add unit. So then I've got information here about just one of my properties as an example. I'll just click in and show you that. It's quite lengthy. I actually just used AI myself. I used ChatGPT to grab a bunch of fake information that might be in a listing. But you can see here that I've added information about what's included in the rental, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, etc., where things are located, safety information. So my example here is fairly comprehensive, but it is also not outside the norm of what you probably already have in most of your listing descriptions. So perhaps it's just copying in those descriptions and then adding a few additional pieces of information. So fairly descriptive, but not over the top here. But I want you to see what I have in place before I begin actually asking questions so that you can understand what's required. So that's the information. As soon as I've added that in, before I actually begin sending it to guests, I will probably want to try it. So as you can see on the right-hand side, there is an autopilot preview. So what's great about that is once I've added the information, I can ask my team or just consider what are the questions that I tend to get from guests. I'll select the unit, which in my case is this lakeside retreat property. And I can actually add questions directly here. I've got a few on my other screen that I'm just going to copy paste to save us just a little bit of time. So I'll paste one in here, like what is the Wi-Fi password? It'll think for just a moment using the information that I've provided it, and then the autopilot will give us an answer right away. It says, hey, the Wi-Fi network is called Lakeside Retreat and the password is here. So that's great. That's a question that I've obviously provided in the frequently asked questions. What about if someone asks the question in another language? So same exact situation, someone needs to know the Wi-Fi password, but what if they ask in Spanish? The autopilot will determine what language is being used in this case and automatically switch to that language. So you can see I still get a response, but my response is also contextually in Spanish. So same information. It says the network is Lakeside Retreat and the password is 125 FEL Wi-Fi. If I switch back to English, for instance, in this case, even within the same conversation, then again, contextually, the AI recognizes that I've made that change. It'll switch back to English for the reply. And as long as this information is included in my knowledge base, then it will give the answer in English. Now, if you're using Minute already and you have devices within that particular rental property, the other thing that's interesting about Autopilot or about Minute Messaging in general is that it can utilize that information in its responses. So I'll just type this one out, but I'll say something like, what is the temperature in the rental? Click send. The autopilot will look to see if our physical sensors are installed. If they are, then it will actually be able to pull that data and tell me the exact temperature within the rental. In this particular case, I actually have more than one sensor within this rental. Sorry. This looks like it's not giving me the live reading. That's fine. Let's do it with an actual real life example instead of here in the preview. And I do have an example of one that I've just been testing with recently as well. But one thing I will point out also is that it does recognize that there's a Nest thermostat here because my device is integrated with Nest. And then I actually listed in my frequently asked questions where that thermostat is. So even though it couldn't answer that question, it did give me the location of where the thermostat is located. I'll actually wait to switch over to the live environment here in a moment, and we'll test that same question again. Before I do that, though, I do just want to show you what happens if they ask a question that's not already in your FAQs. So in this case, I'm going to say, can I extend my stay for another 2 nights? So as I mentioned before, if in some other tools, I know something that we've heard is that the AI can go rogue. One of the things we've done from the very start is to do our best to safeguard against exactly that. So as you can see, if this question is not answered, it's not something I've told the AI that it should be answering or how to answer it, then it creates an escalation. It tells the person that they'll forward this to the team right away so that they can follow up. With that in mind, I'm actually going to switch over to the inbox so that we can see a real conversation. And I want you to see as a manager what that would look like for you. So I've got my phone in front of me and I've set myself or my phone number as the guest's phone number here. You can see the message that it sent to me earlier. And so this came to me via text message. And I'm actually going to ask the same question that I just asked a moment ago. Can I extend my stay by 2 nights? No. Well, you'll have to bear with me just a bit as these messages populate. I'll actually click here on the inbox so that it can refresh even faster. So we see the message come in. This just came from my phone and a text message. So again, AI will think about this for a moment. And the reason I want to repeat this question is I want you to see as the actual host what it will look like in your inbox once this message has been set for escalation. So again, the AI is going to look and see, is this information in the FAQ? It's not. So it gives us a similar message to the one we saw in our preview that it's going to be escalated. What you may have noticed is several things happen. Number one, there's now a button at the top that says resolve. That wasn't there before. There's also a generate answer button here so that AI can help me, generate some text in advance if I want to make it even easier on myself. But essentially, let's assume I, as the host, get this message, which, by the way, you'll get a push notification on our Minute app when this happens, letting you know that someone is waiting on a response from you and the AI couldn't automatically answer their question. I'll just assume that I've spoken to the guest, and then at the end, I say, yes, you can. Obviously, I'm going to tell them a little more than that in a real life scenario, but so that you don't have to wait for me to type, I'll avoid that. The main thing I want to point out is that if you're done with the conversation that you're having with the guest, then you can simply check this checkbox that says mark as resolved and click send. That message will obviously come to me in a text message on my phone. And then, as you can see, now this unresolved has changed to resolved. There's no longer information here at the bottom or a way for me to mark it as resolved, which means if I, as the guest, now ask a question that the AI does have information for, like, I know I asked it earlier, but I'll just do the same one. Is there parking at the rental? Because I've marked it as resolved, the AI will begin auto responding to messages as it was before. However, if I'm actively having a conversation with the guest, I obviously don't want AI jumping in and answering questions for me. So until I mark it as resolved, this question would not have been answered by AI. But in this case, I marked it as resolved, so AI begins to jump right back in. At any point that something is unresolved, you actually see it on the left-hand side as well. Then in the inbox, there'll be a 1 or a 2 or however many conversations that are marked as unresolved would be listed there. Also, I can change the scheduled messages that people receive here. So you saw I did get one automatically as a new guest that basically told me, hey, you can ask your questions here if you have any. But you can go above and beyond that by adding scheduled messages, pre-stay, post-stay, pre-check-in, post-check-in, that sort of thing here if you'd like. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, now that we've sort of taken a look at how the AI works and how the messaging works with resolve and auto unresolve, et cetera, I mentioned that once we've gotten some questions, especially if they're not resolved or it's escalated, I should say, then the autopilot will begin to give suggestions based on questions that people have asked. So, for instance, in one of my earlier examples, as I was doing my testing, I asked about a high chair. It said, I don't know, this isn't listed in the FAQs, therefore I'm not actually sure if there's a high chair or not. I'm going to escalate this to the team. And now it's suggesting to me that I add this information directly within my knowledge base here. Same thing about pets. I asked a question about pets in a previous example for which there's no information in my knowledge base. And so it's saying that I should add this information. Not only that, but I answered these questions as a host earlier in my testing. and it's also seeing what I answered, the information that I gave to those particular guests, and suggesting that as to what I could add. So in other words, I could just click apply and it will actually take what I've spoken to those previous guests and apply it to the knowledge base so that I don't have to answer that question again. It already has the information. So it's as easy as clicking apply, and that's it. I've only had to answer that question once and hopefully never again. Let me just click over to my own notes here to see if there was anything else specific that I wanted to be sure to show everyone. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please do feel free to drop them into the chat. I think that is mostly it. Those are the highlights of how it works. We would love for you all, obviously, to get in, use it, test it out, give us feedback. It is a brand new feature. As you saw, whenever you requested access, it is beta access. We fully recognize that it is a new feature, but we've taken great care not to release even the beta until we feel very confident in its ability to work well for you. That's why we have those guardrails in place so that it doesn't answer questions that it doesn't have the answers for. So you should feel very comfortable using it with your guests. That being said, I'm actually going to click over to our slides again to just mention what's coming next. So there are a few things that we've talked about here. The number one is we talked obviously a lot about auto resolve. As you can see here, Autopilot will analyze messages in an escalated thread to determine when a conversation is resolved, allowing it to resume answering new guest messages. What I mean by that is I mentioned how you'll check the checkbox and say, resolve this, mark it as resolved, and then send the message. What we're working on now is that AI would be able to determine if you've done that, but forgot to check it as resolved. Because what we don't want is that you answer a question for a guest, you forget to mark it as resolved, you go away, the guest asks another question that would very easily be answered by AI, but AI is still paused and not jumping in to answer the question because you haven't marked it as resolved. So we're working now on an intelligent auto resolve feature that would allow you to do that without, or essentially keep you from forgetting to mark it as resolved. We don't want you to do extra work if you don't have to. Right now, we support text and links within this exchange of messages. We're working on supporting images, both in the messages as well as in the knowledge base. More of our property management system integrations to support the data for the knowledge base. In other words, we're working to make it easier for you to import your listing information without even having to copy paste, for instance, to add the knowledge into the knowledge base here. Obviously, not too terribly difficult to copy and paste, but if you have a large number of properties, we know it would be helpful to just auto import that information if you already have it in your property management system or in Airbnb. So we're working on making that even easier for you. And then we're working on improving the analytics so that over time you can see what are the most commonly asked questions or the category of those questions to help you determine what to fix, what to change, how to improve your properties for your guests. With that being said, I would love to ask what else you'd like the AI's help for. You've seen the quick version of how to get started and what the AI is capable of doing, what our Minute Messaging is capable of. What else would you like to see? We are building and growing this feature actively right now. So if there's anything in particular, please do feel free to drop it in the chat. And we will absolutely pass every single message over to our engineering team so that they can review them and rank them in order of priority and get those features added. With that, I'm going to pop over and check a couple of questions. I see the first one is, can it respond in the guest's language? That was probably a little earlier in the conversation, which I know afterwards you saw that, but it's still a very good question. And I do want to mention that in terms of which languages it's capable of answering, essentially almost any language you can think of. So if it's a commonly known and spoken language, there's a very good chance that Minute Messaging will be able to respond in their language. It's obviously going to pick it up on context. So the only thing to consider there are languages that maybe sound similar to one another, like Portuguese and Spanish, etc. That if someone were to misspell something that makes it think it's Spanish instead of Portuguese, for instance, it may respond in Spanish. But if they correct that message and send another asking for clarification that's clearly in Portuguese, then it will contextually know and switch. But just about any language. So it should be very, very helpful in answering questions to guests that maybe aren't speaking your primary language. I see another question about an integration with other smart thermostats. Right now, it's going to integrate with any smart thermostat we integrate with, which would be Nest and Ecobee and Nuki, I believe it is, in the EU. If we don't integrate with them as a company, as Minute, then we can't currently integrate with them with Minute Messaging. But again, we're constantly adding integrations. So if there's one in particular that you would like to integrate with, please do feel free to add that in the chat and I'll pass it along. I see this particular person mentioned Honeywell, so I will definitely pass that on. And it's not the first time that I've heard it. I'll try to skip past the feature requests and just get to the questions. Let's see. One question asks things like what to do, restaurants, etc. Yes, absolutely, it can answer these things. Again, it will need to be added in the knowledge base. So for instance, you may have spotted at the very bottom of my FAQ document, I did add some of the things that you typically add in a guest welcome guide, such as the nearest grocery stores, nearest coffee shops, restaurants that we recommend, etc. And so if I ask Minute Messaging those questions, it will absolutely provide those details and it will provide the distance, etc. So it will say like, oh, you can walk this far, drive this far, etc. But again, it just depends on what you've added to your welcome guide. Let me just double check that the questions that remain are actual questions and not feature requests. Give me just one moment. Yeah, it's a good question here about how things are connected. So in other words, like text message, WhatsApp, Airbnb, etc. So we're able to use either text messaging or WhatsApp already. It's whichever is available or whichever the customer or your guest is using. Obviously, that's going to come back to this unified inbox here in Minute, regardless of what the guest is using. And then we're continuing to add more and more of how that can be unified between property management systems, Airbnb, etc. So keep checking back on that. I don't want to speak out of turn. I will say I believe also Airbnb message may already be included. If not, it's coming very soon. But yes, we can hopefully connect with them either text message, WhatsApp, or through something like Airbnb already. And then the chat history will be here in this unified inbox. I did have one other question someone had asked me even before, and I don't want to miss that question. Oh, it was about whether autopilot can be fully turned off. So if you want to just use the unified inbox here, but for the moment you want to completely turn autopilot off, you absolutely can. I know I'm no longer sharing my screen, but within the autopilot section of the Minute web app, at the top you saw those 3 tabs of the knowledge, the suggestions, and the settings. It's there under settings. You can simply turn autopilot fully off. Someone asked about who would have access to the messages, and the answer there is anyone who you've added as a team member that has access to that particular property. So let's say you have groups of properties in 2 different cities, and some of your Minute users you've only added in one city and not the other. Like let's say you have them grouped by location, which is something you can do within our Minute app, and you add someone just to one location and not the other, then they'll only have access to the messages within the location where they have access. So that's a good question. And then there are questions here about whether you can use this just on specific properties. Yes, absolutely. You can choose which properties are added within the knowledge base there, within the autopilot. so that it's only used within the properties that you've selected. Great. Very good questions. Appreciate all of these. I spotted some other recommendations and feature requests. So I will absolutely pass those on to the team, but I believe I have answered all of the questions. I hope I have. That's going to be it for the webinar itself. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you'll take a moment to just go turn this on and give it a test, even if it's just the preview. I think you'll find it quite fun to see what can be answered and how this could work to help speed up your responses to guests, especially for those easy questions that are easy to answer and shouldn't be stealing your time. If you have any questions or concerns, please do feel free to reach out to us. Our support line is at hello@minut.com. So if you have generic support questions related to your account in general, feel free to reach out there. If you have other suggestions for features that you think of later on, do feel free to connect with me directly. It's nathan.smith@minut.com. Or if you'd like to see this in action directly on your Minut account, again, feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you out. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed it and I hope you'll join us for the next one. But for this webinar, we'll say goodbye and have a great day.